Hi folks, thanks so much for being here. I'm Representative Kate Logan. I represent the Chittenden 16 district. We're in it. It includes Central Old North End and downtown Burlington. This is my co-facilitator, Kate Bailey. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Kate Bailey. My day job is with Building Bright Futures, the Early Childhood State Advisory Council, but today I'm here helping Kate facilitate, and I'm a former chair of the South Burlington School Board. Yes.
Okay, somebody needs to pick up the microphone.
Okay. Oh, gotcha. And I was just about to say, okay, when we're speaking, we need to speak into these microphones. So, audience questions, you'll need to jump up and grab a microphone. This is being recorded by Town Meeting TV. I heard from a lot of folks this week that they couldn't be here. They're traveling for Mother's Day weekend. They have family weddings, et cetera, et cetera. So we made sure that this is being recorded so we can get that information back out to the community. We are going to, I'm just going to do a little agenda review. We're going to start out with a quick introduction. Maggie Lenz is here to do a little legislative process overview, so you know the steps that are coming next for H454, the Education Transformation Bill. Then myself and Senator Ram Hinsdale and Senator Larocque Gulick are going to be giving an overview of what's in the Education Transformation Bill so far. It's not done yet, so we still have a few weeks before it is fully passed out of both chambers and heads to the governor's desk for his signature. Then we're going to start with Q&A. We're going to start with questions from our panelists. Then we're going to take a few minutes to get into small groups so that you can discuss what questions you want to make sure are asked of the folks who are up here. And then we're going to wrap up with a response panel from our panelists, and then Senator Vyhovsky is going to give you some next steps here at the end. So why don't we, I'm going to pass the mic over to the other Kate here, and we'll go ahead and Maggie, if you could come on up and give us our little legislative process overview. Kate's going to be facilitating the next 30 minutes or so.
Great.
Thank you.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, I was going to. Do you want to? Are you in the middle of giving a?
I think we'll start by. Do you want to introduce everyone on the panel first?
I think we'll wait until a little bit later.
Great. So you want me to start?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so Maggie Lenz, I represent the Burlington School District, which is why I'm here and helping Kate put on this fabulous forum that's really needed right now. This will be pretty quick. Legislative process. H454, as introduced, was the governor's plan for education overhaul. It's called the Education Transformation Bill. That bill was studied in depth in House Education and the House Ways and Means, which is the House Tax Committee. They made a lot of changes. It's a substantially different bill than what the governor proposed. That bill went to the Senate Education Committee. They took it up the last couple weeks. They made some changes. It is now in Senate Finance. Senate Finance has been studying it for the last week to talk about the funding mechanisms, which Senate Education also did some work on. And I think that bill is slated to leave Senate Finance probably Thursday, Friday, end of next week. And at that point, there'll be what's called a committee of conference, which is each side, the House and the Senate, will have 3 members that get together in a room, hash out and reconcile their 2 versions of the bill. Just a good reminder that there's no longer a veto-proof majority in the legislature, so the governor, if they want to pass a bill, is going to have to be part of these negotiations as well. Whatever they pass, if they want a bill signed by the governor, he's going to need to be part of these discussions. So that's the legislative process. I think the committee of conference likely will be assigned in the next probably week and a half, 2 weeks.
I mean, you should caveat it with the committee of conference only happens if we don't agree.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So I think the committee of conference is right. The committee of conference would only happen if the Senate and the House do not concur with each other's proposals and decide, okay, this is good, let's just pass this. We agree with the changes that the other side made. I think common wisdom is that it'll probably go to a conference committee, but Martine's right, it's not a given. It's not a given. I think anything else? I think that's it. Thanks.
Steve has a question. I don't know if they're taking questions.
We're not quite at
Doesn't it have to get voted on by the Senate before it goes?
Yeah. So both sides have to vote on it, and then it's either a concurrence, or it's going to then go to a committee of conference. And then at the end, after the committee of conference, the House and the Senate have to vote on the committee of conference report as well. So there's a long ways to go. And then the governor has to make his decision.
Thanks. Okay, that's a general overview, so we're gonna go deeper into an overview of the bill. We're gonna start with the House version, H 454, with Representative Kate Logan.
Yeah, and I'm counting on you to let me know when I need to wrap it up. Okay, so we're gonna start with H 454 as passed by the House. First, I want to make sure that you're clear on the goals of H 454. So the question is, how should we transform public education in Vermont? The assumptions going into this education transformation bill are that we need to ensure that every student in Vermont receives a quality education. Right now, we have vastly different delivery across the state. And there's, you know, I think Vermonters are proud of the fact that we have a significant, we have a great guest here, by the way. I'm excited about it. We take a lot of pride in the local hands-on approach that we take to education in Vermont, but we're seeing that there are wide varieties in spending, wide varieties in student outcomes across the state. So this is one of the primary goals here for this bill, is to create that equity of educational opportunity across the whole state. We want to strengthen statewide education administration. We'll talk a little bit more about proposals that we have along those lines. And then a big portion of this is that we want to stabilize education funding. So we're going to have some proposals to consolidate school districts. We're going to clarify standards for private school tuitioning. There are districts in throughout the state that have no high school, for example, in their school district. So public school dollars are being used to provide private school education, independent school education to Vermont students. So we wanted to clarify this in this new statewide school administration model that we're going to have. And then as part of that, we also want to make sure that technical education and special education are accessible and adequately funded in this new school system. And we want to expand access to early child education, after school and summer programs, and essential arts. What we've seen in other parts of the state where there has been district school consolidation is that education spending did not decrease overall. So people have said, oh, well, if the point of that was to decrease school spending, then why'd you do it? But if you look really closely at what happened, we saw that yes, education did not, per student did not decrease, but what did happen was we gained some efficiency in administrative costs, and the remainder of those funds were plowed back into education. That's the hope here. We do want to see some efficiencies and cost savings in the education system. I think what prompted this was increasing property tax rates. We do know that a large part of that is the costs that are kind of increasing outside of our control. Health insurance costs for staff, school construction costs. There are a number of factors, overhead factors, that are driving the cost of education up in the school. So we will also be studying how to improve, do some cost containment in the school system. Okay, so briefly, we're gonna consolidate school districts. The House proposal was that school district boundaries would go into place, new school district boundaries would go into place on 2027, elections for new school boards would be held in 2028, and then the whole system would go fully operational in 2029.
1 minute.
Great. So there would be a process for determining how schools would close, if there is the need to close any schools. There is a difference between the House and the Senate bill on how those school district proposals will be brought about. The House proposed a subcommittee of superintendents, business managers, school board members, and legislators to bring 3 proposals back next year. There are a number of criteria that are going to be used for how to determine what those school board proposals should be. The House version also was going to establish class size minimums of 15 students for elementary, and then 12, grades 5 through 12 would be 18 student class size minimum. This is also paired with what is called a foundation formula. Rather than every school district coming up with a budget, there would be a set amount per student that would be allocated, and then it would be weighted by other factors like English language learning, special education, which was disaggregated into several categories, and so on. And I think those are the primary things. The one last thing I'll mention is that we wanted to clarify standards for private school tuitioning. So in the House version of the bill, any private school receiving public school dollars has to enroll at least 51% of its students as Vermont students. It has to, or it could be a public school in another state, or if it's an out-of-state school, it's because it's a therapeutic school that we don't offer here in Vermont. So those are the only cases in which an independent school would be able to receive private school tuition. Those are the primary things that I wanted to make sure were shared about the House version of the bill. I know that's a really fast overview, but I wanted to make sure that most of the time was made available to talk about the Senate version of the bill, because that's the most recent version of the bill. We'll have time for question and answer.
Are there stipulations on those private schools?
Those are great questions for the question and answer. And I will say that there's a little difference between the House and Senate version, so I want to make sure that that's presented now by Senator Ram Hinsdale and Senator Larocque Gulick, and then we'll get into questions. So we're not gonna get deep in the weeds, because I know you'll have a lot of questions, and I think it'll be easier to get at those details when we know what you're interested in learning more about. Okay,
Okay,
should we go on an adventure?
sure.
All right, you've got 5 minutes. of time.
Okay, great. So, hi, I'm Senator Kesha Ram Hinsdale. I'm the Senate Majority Leader. I've served on House Ways and Means and Senate Finance, and I actually went asked to go to Senate Education specifically because there is a really big difference between tax equity and educational equity, and we often try to combine that conversation at the peril of both. So that's kind of a large framework that I want to start with. This is my daughter Mira. She just turned 2. You can tell her favorite word is no. And I left my 8-month-old with my mother. So we're 3 generations along Route 7. And education is the backbone and bedrock of our society and of our multicultural democracy. And that's kind of the lens through which I look at all of this. I do also want to say, having been the chair of the Senate Economic Development Committee, that we cannot solve our demographic and economic crisis through education policy. We need to significantly reform our housing and healthcare policy, or we will be back here every year talking about cuts because we do not have enough housing stock to sustain families who'd like to move here, and that is significantly skyrocketing our healthcare premium costs. So I will say everywhere I go that we all have housing goals to meet in the state if we are going to have a sustainable grand list. Burlington's housing goal is 2,000 units in the next 5 years. That is, I want everyone to file that away because teachers have nowhere to live. Most people don't have a place to live, and that is going to continue to be a problem for our schools. This proposal, however it shakes out, I think you heard that emphasized a little bit, is not designed to save money. It will not save money. And so we should only do this if it is going to make the system fairer, work better for kids, and more predictable, so that when a school budget goes down, it doesn't cause 6+ months of confusion and disarray for our kids. I will say I have a very significant bias on the Senate Education Committee that's been to the consternation maybe of my House colleagues who had minimum class sizes. I believe everyone should have an elementary school as close to them as possible. I don't think we should look to close elementary schools to find efficiencies and cost savings. People sometimes say the American dream is, your own house and a car, but I think the American dream is being able to walk to your kid's elementary school. And so that's really important to me, that we, especially from Chittenden County, don't tell our rural areas, you need to close your elementary schools to become more efficient. Burlington, for some of you who don't know, is one of the best examples of that. When I was a new legislator, now too long ago, we were gonna close Barnes and Wheeler because they weren't performing well. And the school district and certain powers that be were saying, we have to do that because they're underperforming and we need fewer schools that are more efficient. The community came together and said, no way. Our elementary schools are really important to us, and they kept these 2 elementary schools open, created a magnet, and added significantly to the vibrancy of Burlington. So that leads to my last point, which is the best coalitions that have won on education policy have been rural and urban together. And I've heard a little too much, and I hope we can really exercise that out of us here today of, well, the rural areas need to fix their problems, because I can tell you there's, you have the tendency to say, well, those big high-spending school districts in Chittenden County are the problem. Nobody's the problem. Kids are not a problem. Educating our kids is not a problem. So we all do really need to be thinking about the broadest coalition possible to support our kids.
Beautiful.
Did you talk about this on the bed? Did you want to?
I don't know how much time I have.
You have 30 seconds.
So the 2 major differences, you heard me talk about one of them, is we don't set minimum class sizes or minimum school sizes in the Senate Education Bill. We took that part out. I don't know that it's fruitful. She just unplugged the TV. I don't know that it's fruitful to talk about the full independent school piece and get into all of the details, because I do think the conference committee will have a lot to say about that question. But I don't think, some people have this sense that the Senate Education Committee lowered the standard because we lowered the threshold. So the House gave us a bill that said you have to have 51% publicly tuitioned students to remain a public option for as an independent school going forward. We didn't just lower the threshold to 25%. We said you have to be in a district without a option that's public, and then you would have to meet that 25% threshold. It would take a long time to talk about places like Windham County and Orange County and the Northeast Kingdom that have a very different reality than Chittenden County. But we can talk about that. You end up, squeezing significantly the number of schools. I just think ours has a bit of a more surgical approach.
Awesome, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. This is Senator Martine Larocque. I am Vice Chair of Senate Health and Welfare, and I'm also on the Finance Committee. And as was said earlier, the Education Bill 454 is now in Senate Finance. So we have about a week with the bill, which is not a lot of time. It's a very complex and far-reaching bill, but we are supposed to vote on it on Thursday, at which time I'm not sure what its future will be after that. But before I get into a little bit of what I've seen, I wanted to set the table with the fact that our education funding system, especially since Act 60, which created the education fund, is one of the most equitable education finance systems in the country. It is complicated, as people have noted in the past, but is incredibly equitable. So the governor's proposal to change our system, especially the foundation formula piece, is, I want to make sure people understand, is a policy decision. We don't have to adopt a foundation formula. It is something that many states use, but it's not, it is a decision that we're making. There would be other ways to support a meat and potatoes public education system. We could draw out hundreds of millions of dollars out of the system if we wanted to make it more affordable for people in the state of Vermont. I'll give you some examples. I'm trying to not make a value judgment on these things, but this is just a fact. We spend money on early college, for example. We spend money on dual enrollment, where students can take college courses. We spend money on adult education. We spend money on having basically a two-track system. We have a public system, and then we have a private system that receives public dollars. We also pay extraordinary special ed costs by funding these therapeutic schools, which are very expensive. And if you've been reading the news, they are also highly problematic because they are not held to the same standards as our public schools. And again, you can pull up some articles recently of some really horrible things that have happened in some of those therapeutic schools. I would send you to Vermont Digger, for example, to learn more. So those are just some examples of how money is pulled out of our K-12 public education system to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. But we've made a policy decision, at least as of right now, to go toward a funding formula, a foundation formula. We are currently looking at 4 different foundation formulas. One of them is called a cost-based or outcomes-based system, or student-based. It's got many names. It is a foundation formula that is used by about 37 states, Puerto Rico and DC. We got a great presentation by Tammy Colby, who is one of the architects of that foundation formula. She is an education expert. She is world-renowned for her understanding of special education. So it was great to have her as part of, it is great to have her as part of this work. She presented us with an empirically derived foundation formula that uses, what we are currently spending as well as what outcomes we want. And then she builds a foundation formula on that. And her weights are also empirically derived. And I'm assuming that people know what weights are. They are just money that is allocated to students who have more needs, who cost more to educate than sort of your average student. I do want to honor the fact that all of this is an effort to make our system more equitable. But in places like Burlington, where we probably educate our kids above an adequate level, right, and we pass our school budgets, I don't see that there is an outcome here that will not have us lowering our cost per pupil. We will probably also see a decrease in our property taxes, but our cost per pupil spending will most likely go down. Other districts will probably see an increase in their cost per pupil spending, especially those districts that struggle to pass their budgets, that are constantly making cuts. This is going to bring them up. So it really is looking at a statewide landscape as opposed to district to district. But one of the things I keep sharing with my committee is I will not vote for a bill that is going to break our system. If we break our system, it will take decades to fix. And we can't afford that. It would cost money, it would cost personnel, and it would cost resources to fix. And I'm not willing to do that. So I want folks to understand that is, for me, is not an option. We have to make sure we get this right. And we have to make sure we take the time necessary to get it right. Thank you. I will pass it on to Jean.
Nope, keep that one.
No, keep it down
Use
here.
this one.
I'm gonna take
You guys use that one.
So we're gonna switch over to Q&A, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions and a lot of information to digest, but I wanna start Q&A with the panelists. If there's anybody who has a question for any of our representatives and senators from Montpelier here.
Can we have some intros? Just since
Yes.
it's like a
Yes,
one-to-one
absolutely.
ratio. We'd love to know who you guys are.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe we could introduce the panel, and we'll have time for full panel response after our Q&A portion. So I want to start with Krista, yes? Oh, I'm sorry, Michelle, yes. Michelle Sligalczyk is from the Burlington Educators Association. Then we have Krista from the Friends of Vermont Public Education, Krista Huling.
Yeah.
We have Matt Guile from Winooski School District, Winooski Educators Association. Nikhil Goyal
Yes.
from Vermont School Workers United. We have Christine Gaynor Patterson from the Essex Westford School Board. Senator Tanya Vyhovsky from Montpelier, from our senator from Burlington. Remind me of your.
I also represent the Chittenden Central District. I'm the
Chittenden
district attorney.
Central District, the same as Senator Gulick here. And then we have Burlington School Board member Jeannie Waltz. Great. Okay, so are there any panelists who have questions? I think Michelle, go ahead. Get to the mic when you can. Thank you. These are questions for, if you could direct a question to a specific senator.
Sure.
that'd be great.
I'll preface, I mean, I think we have a lot of questions, but one thing that just kept coming up, I think, a few times is this question of having equitable schools across the state, about needing more equity, about one of the kind of driving forces here is about equity. It seems to me right now Vermont has significantly more education equity than most other states in the country. And I'm asking specifically, I saw in both the House and the Senate version this 10% supplemental option that districts can vote to increase their spending, which to me suggests that there could be radically different levels of spending, and that would actually increase education inequality across the state. A place like Burlington, we have amazing residents. We vote for our school budgets every time. Doesn't matter, $200 million school, we're voting. We love our schools. We have a real dedication to building education here. I can see us passing the necessary funds up to that 10%, and other school districts would not. And so what is the response there? If this is about equity, about improving equity, how does this address that question?
That's a great question. I'm right here, Buck. So, and I hear two things in your question that I'd like to answer. First, the really, maybe, I don't know if it's easy, but I don't want to put, I'll let Senator Gulick speak for herself, but I think we both are very concerned about the supplemental spending piece too, and the potential that it can create inequity. We did it, I kept raising it as an education policy question in our committee, but the whole Senate has a compressed timeline, so I am really interested to hear how finance is thinking about that as well. I don't want to scare anybody, but we're all very busy. The second part, I think, is a more interesting one, not more interesting, but a more complex one, which is who votes up their school budgets, right? So when we look at how these foundation formula models play out around the state, I don't have full empirical data to back this up, but what it appears to look like is that land wealth poor communities that have a lot of low-income kids also worry about spending extra tax dollars on their budget. They tend to have more modest and conservative budgets. I liken it, I was a free lunch kid, and if you said you could go to college with these forgivable loans, or you can go to college with a grant, if you feel a sense of scarcity, you're going for the grant. And if there's no grant, you're very skeptical of something, that you vote for and support, and then believe that this magical formula is going to take care of you over time. So when we implement the foundation formula, you see areas where significant weighting would go to low-income kids. Those budgets in lower spending communities go up significantly. So while I think we don't have good modeling yet for places like Burlington and Winooski about the English learning population, if you apply even, Dr. Colby's weights in their fullest, you do see the benefit, I think, go to the low-income communities and the low-income kids who have not been getting those resources. I always want to, I'm going like this because we have chart after chart of if we cut it this way or that way, if we include sparsity. We have not looked at special education modeling because it's too hard for our joint fiscal staff. So I'll stop there before I get way too nerdy, but you know, I do believe from all the modeling that I've seen that this creates more educational spending equity because you're not relying on your community that might feel financial or economic scarcity to be the ones to decide how much your kids need.
Thank you, it's a really good question. I didn't have a chance to mention that another issue with this bill, 454, is it actually doesn't look at the real cost drivers in the system. It doesn't take into consideration healthcare costs, inflation, mental health, deferred building maintenance. I mean, there is an element of school construction in the bill, but these are huge cost drivers in the system, and they are not really taken up in the bill. So to your question, I think it's a great one. The idea is if we are adequately investing in education and each student is adequately funded, do we need supplemental spending? That is my question. And the other thing is, will we be sued, right? We do have this law of the land where there is supposed to be educational equity across the state. And once we have districts that are starting to spend above the base, it does beg the question, is this, will this fly in the face of Act 60? So it's a very, very good question. We're supposed to figure that out between now and Thursday, so wish us luck.
One more question from the panel before we turn over to the audience. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, just the foundation formula. Which scenario is that? Because the one that I was looking at was scenario C. Do you know which? I'm just again. I was digging through it all, and I was just trying to figure out the impact specifically on Winooski.
With supplemental spending, Matt, is that your question?
No, scenario C waiting.
Yeah.
It's the
which?
whole thing.
It's a whole-
Yeah.
So there's 4 scenarios.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, so to be fair, thank you all for really paying close attention, doing your homework. That's not easy. That is not easy in this process. To pull back for everyone else who will have no reason to know what all these scenarios are, you know, we got the Tammy Colby endorsed and formulated weights from the House. You know, there's a lot of reason to say that is a package that taken together will stand up in court. It has strong evidence behind it. We were working on other scenarios that are absolutely policy choices that I will say could unravel the larger picture or you know, really have to be discussed. And I don't want to get too personal, but Dr. Colby had a major injury while we were doing all of this. And Senator Gulick and I sent her a gift basket because, you know, she has done so much, I think, uncompensated work to help our education system be more equitable. But it was very hard in Senate Education to look at these scenarios where we might look at sparsity as a function of being in a small school, or we might look at adding back in some of the Act 127 weights in a very modest way for middle school at 0.02. This is adding 0.02 to 1 being an elementary school student without any particularized needs that require weighting, and high school at 0.1. So fairly modest. It's a policy choice that we were asked to look at because of the Act 127 districts that kind of just already took a hit based on the formula of a few years ago. That said, you have to have a regular process of checking in with this formula, and that's built into the House proposal as well. I don't even remember, honestly, what scenario C is. I think we mostly landed on B2, but we also, I don't want us to get too lost in the numbers because they do need to be worked out. They are not baked. And one thing that's really important to know when you're talking about Burlington and Winooski even more specifically is that we have a proxy weight for English learners right now that is hard to graft onto the actual reality of a place like Winooski because both the House and the Senate agree we should have the 6 levels of English learning weights built in. Those are proposed by Tammy Colby. They're, I think it's a much fairer and more accurate way to administer those weights. But our joint fiscal office of like 3 people helping us with this are using 1.4 as a weight to model that, even though it can go up to 2.5 if you are starting at the beginning of your English learning journey. So there's a lot of reasons why it's hard to look at the scenarios and understand what will happen to a district, and I know that's dissatisfying, but we were actually the first committee to ask JFO and be able to receive the district by district figures because the House was working on their model, passed it, sent it to us, and that's a lot of work. So I just don't think it's fully accurate right now.
And I'm just gonna say, I think this is one of the things that's gonna be discussed most heavily in conference committee. This is one of the most significant differences between the House and Senate bill, in addition to a slightly different base level funding amount. Lower in the Senate bill versus the House bill, slightly different weighting system. Again, like Senator Ram Hinsdale said, the House bill doesn't have full modeling for the impact on each school district of the House version of the bill. We do have that for the Senate version of the bill, and what we see now is that education spending in Burlington per pupil is gonna go down. Our overall allocation from the state will go down by several $1 million under the Senate version of the bill. So we aren't going to be able to fully address those concerns. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to hold this event right now, so you're aware that this is one of those tension points and that it's going to be discussed in the conference committee, and we all need to be paying attention and get more information.
Can someone add, as a process point, the Agency of Education dropped a new weight proposal on us the day before we voted the bill out in Senate Education. And I will say, Senate Education, you heard a little bit about our political numbers. Senate Education is 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. For the most part, our entire committee chose to ignore what the Agency of Education presented at the 11th hour. It was frankly irresponsible and like real B team on the part of this consulting group that they've paid a lot of money for. You can quote me on that.
Yeah. Okay, if you have like a 30-second response, I
Yeah.
want to give you a chance, and then hopefully we have a full 15 to 20 minutes for audience Q&A.
Matt, to your question, it's really hard to imagine what the impacts are gonna be until we have the districts drawn, because that will have a huge impact on what the costs are, right? I also wanted to set the table that the cost-based or outcomes-based formula empirically derived, data-driven by Tammy Colby, that base is 15,033. The governor's base, which is the evidence-based model, which has been debunked in many states, but I won't go into that right now, is 13,200. And then there were 2 other ones, B and C, I think that you were talking about, so just to set that
And the Senate
table.
landed on, I believe the amount was for C. The Senate landed on scenario C as the base funding amount. But let's, there's so.
14.8, that, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the enhanced.
Yeah. Let's move into audience questions.
Okay, I'm gonna give you a mic. When you have a mic, ask the question, and then if you can, direct it towards someone specific. I wanna get as many questions in a 15 to 20 minute timeline as possible, so the shorter the answers, the more questions we have. I'll let you go first.
Okay, Kathy Alwell, I live in Ward 1 here in Burlington. Having worked on these weights as a school board member in Burlington for many years, and finally getting it through, and the first year it's through, we're now doing something different, has totally to do with our governor and the new head of education, which wasn't okayed by you people. And I have a real problem with where she comes from, what he's up to, and what's going on generally in this country. And I am really scared to watch this go on, and I'm asking why is the Senate and the House not saying, no, we are doing nothing. If you want us to study it, fine, we'll study it for a year or two. But this is way too much. Between now and Thursday, you're saying you're going to figure out whatever it was. I just can't watch this. It drives me absolutely crazy to watch this. And I know that it is backed by his heritage fund and the, what do you call it?
Americans.
I can't even think of the schools, huh?
Oh, the charter.
Charter schools.
Yeah.
And everything I've written, they cost far more, and I don't want charter schools in this state. And I don't know, I really want you to explain why we're even going along with this.
Who would you like to?
Oh, I don't care, whoever wants to.
I'm on team Kathy.
Yeah.
Me too.
What you're talking about is Act 127, which we are only in year one of its true implementation, and when you talk about you've been working on the weights, I just want to make it really clear, the weights are a monetary percentage allocated to a student based on need, okay? That is what we're talking about when we say weights. So, we have an equitable system that just got a tune-up.
Exactly.
And that was spurred in 2018, legislation commissioned to study. Tammy Colby was a huge part of that.
But there were 3 universities that.
I know, I'm just saying, when we hear Tammy Colby's name and her recommendations for weights, there is a really good reason to listen, that's my point. So, and Burlington did feel a very positive impact, we are in the midst of it right now, year one. So yes, why are we now switching gears? And I believe this is political, because there are towns that are very used to having a financial cushion, and it's a heavier lift for them to, I'm sorry, I know, it is hard to be like, I'm sorry you're having a hard time with your not having extra money anymore. That's basically what we're saying. But they also have too much political clout. Anyway.
Yeah.
Representative Logan, can we go down to Nikhil first and then come back to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I got it here. Yeah, no, I think it's a very important set of points. I mean, I think if you recognize that the governor's, that the mandate that the governor received in November was about reducing property tax, then the job, I think, of the legislature is to find ways to reduce property taxes. And the research, and you look at the studies that the AOE and other entities have put out, is that the biggest drivers of property taxes are healthcare. And that to me is, we talk about cost savings and potential cost savings, but to me, the real crux is how we reduce the spiraling cost of healthcare and especially in the hospitals. And then the second point, if you look at the report that the AOE's put out, the other big cost driver is the fact that the Ed Fund is responsible for funding all of these new mental health positions and programs. Like, that is not being funded through the general fund. That would save us millions of dollars if we funded it equitably through the general fund. And too often we tend to burden schools with the responsibility of making these investments and funding these investments when it should be all of us together progressively funding them rather than on a handful few.
So, to your point, when we passed Act 127, and to Senator Gulick's point, we created one of the most, if not the most equitable way that we spend the money. But we failed to address the way that we raise the money, because we could make that system much more equitable as well. At the present moment, the top third of taxpayers pay a fraction of a percentage of their income into the education fund, which is overly burdening our middle and lower income earners, because their property values are a much larger percentage of how much money they have available to them. And I remember when we were moving forward with Act 127, that was an opportunity we actually had to make it a much more equitable system all around, and an opportunity that we really missed out on. I actually remember saying, if we don't address how we raise the money, we're gonna find ourselves in a world of hurt in a few years. And now here we are, taking the wrong message from what the voters said about lowering property taxes and instead destroying our public education system, and it's wrong.
Okay, Representative Logan, I'm gonna give you a minute to respond.
Yep, so I would add, you know, the governor's proposal, we're not doing the governor's proposal. I wanna repeat what Kesha said, at the beginning. We should only do this if it is going to result in a better educational outcomes for all of Vermont students. We don't have to do this. I think that's, so let's talk about the merits of the proposals. Do we think we'll have better, more equitable education outcomes for students if we do consolidate school administration into a smaller number of school districts? That's one of the primary changes we're talking about. That's one of the decisions we have to make in the next couple of weeks about how we might move forward to decide on proposals. We won't decide on that this year. We'll decide on that next year. So there are a number of things that the governor wanted to do. We're not doing any of it. We don't have to. We still got elected. We get to decide on policy. He can veto what we pass if he wants to.
Thank you, everyone. Those are all very well said. I do want to say that this is an opportunity to make some good reform to the system. We have 119 districts. We have 52 supervisory unions. We just had a 20-page PowerPoint 2 days ago in Senate Finance on how our governance structure works. It is extremely complicated. We don't need 119 districts and 52 supervisory unions. We got a great letter from VASBO, which is the Vermont Association of help me.
Business officials.
Yes,
School
business offices, yes, and it outlined the complexity and inefficiency of supervisory unions. They are multi-layered, multi-tiered, complicated systems. We don't need those in the state of Vermont. So if a simpler, more transparent system ends up emerging from the work that we're doing, I think that's a good thing. I just wanted to add that is important in all
Thank you,
of this.
Senator Gulick.
Yeah.
Okay, another question.
Hi.
Yeah. Wait for the mic. Oh, you got one. Perfect.
Yay.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Ariel. I'm a mom, and I live in Ferrisburg, Vermont. Thank you for hosting this today because it's important, and I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. I have two questions that I'm curious about. First, I'd just like to quickly let you know I have a third grader who's really struggling with reading at his school, and we are at a loss because our school is not currently functioning the way it needs to be. We lost our principal about a month ago. We haven't had reading intervention for him all year. He's at tutoring right now at Sullivan. It's costing our family a ton of money. Our property taxes have gone up, and so all of our costs are going up, and we don't feel like we have a school that's a high-quality school to send our kids to right now. So we went to the school that's closer to our house, which is in Charlotte. We live 3 miles from the border, which is a crazy thing to say, right? And asked them if we could send our son to that school, because he needs to repeat 3rd grade because he can't move on to 4th grade because he doesn't know how to read yet. And when we asked them to, I guess, choice our kid in, to enroll him in the school, they told us that in order to do that, we would have to pay $22,000 a year per child to send our kids to school. So in order to get my 2 kids a quality education in this state right now, it would cost my family $316,000 for their K-8 education. And so my 2 questions are, one, are there any types of quality assurances to ensure that the schools that districts are supposed to be maintaining are actually being maintained so that our kids are actually learning? And the second is there any talk about open enrollment, opening up boundaries so that a kid from Winooski who's maybe not succeeding at Winooski High School can attend BHS or SB? Like, I think that there's a lot of opportunities for kids to have additional opportunities in our public school choice system. And I'm wondering if this bill addresses either of those 2 issues. Thank you.
Do you have someone you want to respond to that?
Oh, anyone?
All right, go ahead.
I'm happy to start the response. My first response would be, you have a Senator Ruth Hardy, who is is an incredible resource. Her understanding of education finance and education governance is really, it's one of the best that we have in the legislature, so I would certainly recommend that you speak with her. Second of all, I would just say, and this is an important aspect of all of this work, do we have an agency of education that is prepared to take on this reform? Are they well-staffed? Are they well-resourced? Do they have the expertise to put this reform in place? And sadly, I think my answer is no. And I'm pointing to your situation as a good example of, if we had an agency of education that was doing its job, it would be in that school and it would be making sure that your child is getting the education that they deserve, okay? That is at the crux of this. Every student should get an education that they need and deserve, and the agency of education and the governor, they are responsible for that. And that is not happening. Years ago, the agency of education was pretty good at saying, this is a failing school. We're gonna go in and we are gonna help that school succeed. They don't seem to be doing that as much anymore, if at all. So that is a problem. I personally do not believe that school choice is the answer. School choice ends up costing more and ends up creating inequities in the system. I'm gonna pass to my colleague, Senator Vyhovsky, in a second. And then in terms of the reading, I am really sorry you're experiencing that. I was actually lead sponsor on a bill last year, as I think it was 118, that passed. And it was one of the things in that bill was supposed to be making sure that students in kindergarten through third grade get, tested and make sure that they're reading where they need to be. And if they have a reading deficiency, that they get all of the supports that they need. It's a new bill, it's still kind of working out the kinks. I know the AOE actually is committed to doing a lot around literacy, at least that is the plan. So I really appreciate your question, and we want to make the system better for your children.
I should have clarified, it's cheaper for us to send our student to a private school than it is to send our kid to the public school that's closest to our house.
Yeah, I need to talk to Ruth Hardy.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I'm glad you brought up your literacy bill because Vermont for many years was invested in some really bad literacy teaching practices that we are just now getting out of because of Senator Gulick's work in the last biennium. So I'm glad that you brought that up because that's one of the things I wanted to say. But the other challenge, and I share Senator Gulick's view that school choice is actually not the answer, and what we actually see it do is bleed our public system dry so that we have less and less capacity to respond to the needs of students who are perhaps struggling because there are two tracks and the private schools don't have to take students who are struggling, and the private schools, what it leaves behind is the students that may be the most expensive to educate without any of the resources to do it. And when I look across the world at the strongest public school systems in the world, those schools don't rely on those systems don't rely on private schools at all, let alone public money going into private schools. And so, and it's one of the concerns I actually have with the foundation formula as a whole is that there's no guarantee that we don't use it to systematically underfund our schools.
Yeah, and I'd like to add too, I think that's another reason for moving to larger school districts, frankly. This is one of the justifications for that. Again, the governor's proposal was gonna save us money essentially by underfunding our school system and forcing us to fire a large percentage of our school staff and close a bunch of schools. We're not gonna do that. That's not part of what we're doing. There have been years and years and years of studies, though, that have suggested that we go the route of school district consolidation, because it will provide a broader range of resources within a school district for specific student needs. That's the proposal anyway. Again, I want to emphasize that H454 does not put us on a specific path this year. It puts us on a path to study a bunch of questions like, how do we need to reform the agency of education to make us have a functioning statewide administration? How, can school district consolidation do something for us? So I've got 5 seconds. I'm just gonna cut it off there.
All right, I'm gonna give you
I
2
just
seconds.
want to clarify, does the bill have anything about like whether or not schools are performing well in it?
Yeah, it does, actually. There are going to be statewide standards studied. That's part of what we're planning. This is what I mean when I say that we want to improve statewide, school administration, is that we need a stronger agency of education to deal with precisely the situation that you're talking about, and we need stronger statewide standards, and we need more resources for individual schools to help support them. None of that's possible within our school system and frankly with this administration right now, but that's a different question.
Okay, 2 minutes for Krista to
Sure.
respond, and then another question.
Just to respond, I'm here with the Vermont Friends for Public Education, but I was also on the State Board of Education for 6 years and chaired for 2 years. And education quality reviews stopped in about 2019, and they have not been done since then. It was excuse of COVID, but it stopped well before that. So when we had a new secretary came in, and the secretary chose not to use the education quality reviews. So the education quality reviews take the education quality standards, which are created by the State Board of Education, which a new version is actually starting July 1st, and it outlines exactly what schools and the standards they should have. One of the things that our group has been really advocating for is when you go and look up this EQS, Education Quality Standards, that applies to all Vermont students taking public tuition. So anybody with public dollars should follow the same rules, and they don't. And we have a 2-tiered system, and we have an agency that can't support either, right? So they don't have the money. So they don't have the staff. We have these independent schools that they maybe get a review once every 5 years. Our public schools are not getting the reviews they need. So we need one system, one set of rules, and an agency that can actually look at all the rules and make sure everybody's getting what they need. And I'm sorry, I have a 3rd grader, and it's hard, so thank you.
And
Perfect
just-
timing,
just
thank
to- Just to quickly tag on to that, I believe at last count, there were about 70 independent schools that had not been reviewed. They were way past due for their review, and there was no plan to get to those reviews.
And one of them, you were referring to the newspaper. You can look that up, because when I was on the state board, we actually had a review, and we didn't like what was happening in that school, and we asked them to do a review in a shorter amount of time period, and we moved it to 3 years, and they didn't get to it for almost 7 years.
Okay, let's move to the audience question.
Hi, I'm Steve Gorder. I live in Burlington. My daughter is a special education teacher in this area. And my question is, as this bill winds its tortuous path through the legislative labyrinth, what is it that we should be telling our representatives and senators and the people who are on the committees and the conference committee? What should we be pushing for? One thing I can think of is the timeline. The House has a much longer timeline. I'm not sure which, the House or the Senate, has a better thing for the independent school policy. And
The House, I would say.
okay, so anyway, I'd like to hear from you folks what we should be bugging your colleagues about.
Yeah, actually that is a great segue. We do have a set of panelists here for you today who came prepared to give their response to where we're at with H 454 at this stage in the legislative process. So I think this would be a great time to shift into making sure that everybody gets a chance to share their input. I see Senator Gulick here wanting to mention something, so I'll definitely, why don't we start off with you, and then we'll just go right down the line, 2 to 3 minutes. We want to hit the highlights of what you want to make sure that people understand about where we're at with H 454 right now, and then we're going to wrap up with Tanya, Senator Vyhovsky, giving you some next steps for how to respond here in the next couple of weeks.
I will time you for the.
I can be really quick, and Steve, I may have even talked to you about this already, but to me, some of the most crucial things that we need to be focusing on are the timeline. Is it realistic? Does it make sense? Is it based in, reality? The foundation formula, will it provide a quote-unquote adequate education for every student in the state of Vermont? And also the weights that are that come from the foundation formula, right? That the weights are tied to the foundation
Right,
formula,
right.
so that is key. I would also say, you know, the districts, that is going to be really important as well. Where are the boundaries going to be drawn, and how are they going to be drawn? We have not discussed this, I'm sorry, I'm gonna take longer than I thought. But the House version of the bill had a really thoughtful approach to redistricting. They have someone on that committee who understands the geography of Vermont, someone who understands transportation, someone from the Vermont School Boards Association who understands school boards. The Senate took that committee, they just took it out, and they replaced it with
8
legislators. So it becomes a politically charged group that will set boundaries based on legislative and political, you know, desires. So that is another, those are things that I think we need to be focusing on. Who's setting the boundaries? What are the boundaries? What's the timeline and what's the foundation formula?
Okay, 2 minutes for Jeannie.
Let's pretend I retroactively yielded my time to Martine. I'm just gonna say ditto.
Thank you.
And I wanna point out that everyone has been, the decision makers have been charged with gathering community input. I do not think that is obtainable without a longer timeline. So I'm just gonna reiterate, this entire process needs to slow down.
Senator Vyhovsky.
So I'm not actually gonna say much because I have a spot at the end to speak, but what I will say is from my side-by-side overview, the House bill is by and large a better bill.
Christine from the Essex Western School Board.
So I prepared some information, a current state, and but based on what I was hearing from today, I'm gonna shift gears a little bit. What I heard today is that this bill is not about saving money, although money needs to be saved. What I heard today was this bill will not address or solve cost drivers. What I've heard today is that this bill will not address the rising needs and costs of special education students. What I've heard today is that this bill may and is looking at consolidation. What I've heard today is that this bill is about equity. What I've heard today is that scenario C is not to be looked at, although it is public facing and it shows a $2 million deficit for my district. What I've also heard is that a diverse committee with advisory from school representation was removed and is only legislators who will be making this decision. So my district has a strong equity policy. They have a new literacy program to provide quality education. We've been working to increase access to public community engagement and use them as a resource to the decisions that we make and how they impact students. Due to our current state, to keep our students at first, we decided that we would level program, and due to the cost drivers that will not be addressed in this bill, that caused a $6 million deficit. And still, our community had to pay, right, because the drivers were still there. They chose to pass the budget. With passing that budget and the concessions that need to be made, it caused consolidation in my district and lots of concessions that will need to be made. With this scenario that may or may not happen with an extra $2 million missing, where will we put students? These are 7-figure cuts. There is no place to consolidate. There's no room in schools to consolidate. And when you're putting all of these, if you try to get modulars, that's also 7 digits of cost. There's no place to keep level programming with more cuts. So when the question at the beginning was, will this bill, what we're looking for is not about financial, but equities, no. The answer is no. This will not create equity. We have equity. We're fighting to preserve equity, and this bill will cause inequities.
Thanks, Christine. Okay, Dr. Nikhil Goyal from the Vermont Workers United.
Thank you. So I want to talk about a few issues that are at play here. Vermont public education is under threat from all different directions. We have the Trump administration, the U.S. Supreme Court. They want to open the floodgates to publicly funded private and religious schools. But we really do have the antidote to fight against this. Vermont has experienced a steady growth of public tuition students enrolled in private schools, while public school enrollment has declined over the past decade. Public dollars going to private schools increased 71% from 2008 to 2018 to reach $85 million. 13 religious schools captured more than $1 million of public funding in the 2022-2023 school year. Schools that have discriminated against LGBTQ students and kids with disabilities. We've also sent millions of dollars to lavish boarding schools in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, even the country of Sweden. And my belief is that until we turn off the spigot to private schools, we will see major cuts to public schools, mass layoffs of teachers, and the denial of quality education to thousands of children. While I have some disagreements with the class and school size provisions in the House bill really has some very important provisions worth fighting for. And that is, the one piece is restricting public funding for private schools with enrollments that have less than 51% public tuition students. It also fully cuts off funding to out-of-state private schools. And it prevents a community from shutting down its public school and converting it into a private school. The Senate bill has none of those provisions, or it severely weakens those provisions and would do very little to stop the privatization of public education. Now, the simple solution to comply with the Supreme Court ruling, Carson v. Macon, which bans states from excluding religious schools from public funding if private schools are being subsidized, is to ensure that public dollars are exclusively flowing to public schools. And there was a piece of legislation that I know Senator Gulick and others have introduced in the past, which would do exactly that, with some carve-outs for therapeutic schools and the 4 historic academies, which are essentially quasi-public entities. And so we're really at a crossroads here, and the decisions the legislature makes in this session will determine the course of public education and democracy in Vermont over the next 50 years. And so I believe that we need to fight for well-funded public community schools with small classes, experiential learning, universal school meals, health and social supports, washers and dryers, and other resources. And as educators, we know that the challenges that children grapple with in the classroom, grapple with at home, get carried into the classroom. And so that's why the community school model is so important. And then finally, as we transform public education, I think we also need to address the biggest cost drivers, and that is healthcare. And if we don't do that, we're going to be back in the same place in the future. And so finally, if public schools are what Justice Stephen Breyer called nurseries of democracy, then the fight for public education is the fight to safeguard American democracy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nikhil. All right, Matt Guile from the Vyhovsky Educators Association.
This is short. My name's
Sure.
Erin, I'm a parent. Can you do a one-pager with that and just send it? Because for me, to come on a Saturday morning, I appreciate all of your service and all of you people we're meeting today, but like, it is so hard, even as a person who is very overeducated, to understand what you guys are talking about and the language, like even like the weights, I don't even know what the word sparsity is, like just like kind of a like guide so that more people can participate. And I appreciate the questions, and like Kathy, amazing point just about why are we doing this, because that is my biggest question as well. But just like a little bit more clarity and succinctness, like would I think be a full send for us to support you guys and to talk to people across the state.
Kate, can I respond to that directly really quickly? And then we can move on to Matt's comments.
Sure.
Yeah. I was going to say this at the end. There's going to be a QR code that you can scan here at the end, and there's a clipboard where you can write down your name, your questions, etc. If you fill out, the Google form and you say what more information you want, you'll get it. We'll make sure. We'll follow up. I knew that this was just a start of a conversation, and we're coming close to the end of the legislative session, so I'm a little stressed out about the fact that people don't have all the information that they need, but we'll do our best to get it to you.
All right, we have 3 more responses, and then we're going to leave time for Senator Vyhovsky to give us more action steps at the end. So go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, again, Matt Guile, I'm the librarian at the Winooski School District, and I'm focusing on what this bill means for Winooski. Right, when the weights went into effect last year, people talked about Winooski being a winner, right? Like that we had just won the lottery, right? But those weights were based on what it costs to educate the students in our building. And those are really, really important for, so we're using those funds. We increased our multilingual liaison department, which those are our translators. We've got 8 of them that collectively speak more than 20 languages. We increased our support for multilingual students. We have an ML teacher at every single grade, right? And I think those are really vital resources that Winooski needs to have in other districts supporting the same students that we need to have in order to educate our students. The scenario C that I was talking about would mean $2.5 million less funding for Winooski specifically. And I think whatever funding model that gets adopted, it really, really needs to take into account what it costs to educate educate all of our students. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have Krista Hewling up from Vermont, Friends of Vermont Public Education.
Yes, so thank you. So also a mom, as I said, a 3rd grader, a teacher at South Burlington High School, social studies teacher, and former State Board of Education member. And really, I'm just going to go to the question of like what to do, right? And make this really simple. Our group just says there should be one system, one set of rules. We make it really complicated by giving a lot of our public dollars to independent schools that have no accountability and no rules. Just for some instances, we're really calling for open enrollment for all students without selective admissions. You talked about there are schools that don't admit people because of who they are, their identity, the identity of their parents. When I was on the state board, I listened to independent schools come in and say some kids didn't fit their mission. Public schools are, everybody is our mission. And everybody has a place. So really just calling to make sure there's open enrollment with no strings attached. We want to see requiring licensed teachers in every single classroom. So that's not the case. That's not required for independent schools. They don't have to have licensed teachers. And so without licensed teachers, you don't have a set of rules, accountability, so you don't know. There are a lot of teachers that maybe don't have educational training, that maybe they have subject area, and maybe you all have taken classes with somebody that really knows their subject but doesn't know how to teach. I know I have, and it's not great. So we're really calling for every school should just have a licensed teacher. The idea that requiring all schools to meet education quality standards. We have a set of rules that people have worked strongly for. It's come from the State Board of Education, which is actually, all their meetings are public. When we see in these bills that things are moving to the agency for rulemaking, that means it's behind closed doors, right? In a state board, every decision has to be made in public. So when we see that is changing in some of these rules, that's really concerning, right? And so having rules, again, up front, and then just oversight by independent, that we need oversight of an independent entity that's staffed and resourced to enforce the rules. So to your question in the back, is that because we have this 2-tier system and we don't have the staff, we're not even taking care of what we have. And we have great systems to protect, and why have two? And just one last thing, in the different versions of the bills, there's some, I think it's the House, it says you have to have education quality standards, but not the Senate. It's just coming up with a consistent one set of rules. And that would just be, and the big thing that you can do if you're sitting in the audience, especially you're here, you have a senator that's a Senate pro tem. He decides who's in the room and at the table. Right? Write to your Senate pro tem, write to whoever your legislator is, and tell them what your priorities are, and tell them what you want to see. And if it is to just slow down and study, is to reach out and have those comments. And just, I would say, it is very hard to get versed in all this, but do the best that you can and encourage others to do the same.
Great, Krista, again with the right on time. Perfect.
Teacher.
Our final word is from Michelle Segalczyk, yes, from the Burlington Educators Association.
Yeah, I'm going to start actually where Kathy started, former school board member of Burlington School District, which is why are we playing ball here? The governor proposed this as a cost-saving mechanism, right? That's where he started. And the claim here is we're not starting there, that this is instead a political opportunity, an opening for us to improve the quality of our schools. And actually, I think it's a missed political opportunity to defend our spending. Like, we spend money on schools in Vermont. It's one of the best things about Vermont. It's one of the things that's actually functioning best in Vermont, and it's a missed political opportunity to defend that, to defend our spending, to defend our schools. And instead, we're playing ball with this like umbrella of austerity on so many fronts. And even if we're saying, no, we're not doing the governor's plan, you're still playing the game of a need for austerity. The political message that people are receiving is that austerity is needed in some capacity, we just have to do it correctly. And I really think we should clearly reject that. Do not start from a place where our schools need to be, our spending needs to be cut on education. It is one of the few things Vermont does incredibly well. The second part is like, okay, if it's not about spending, we're hearing in the room that instead it's about the quality of our schools need to be improved. And it's really disheartening. If you look up articles about the Vermont House bill, you see this quote from Representative Jill Krasinski repeatedly about how the status quo, she says the status quo for our kids and our teachers is unacceptable. And representative of Burlington School District, the schools in Burlington are incredible. I taught in New York City before moving to Burlington at one of the best schools in the country, and Burlington has such opportunity for students for at the highest level, academic opportunities for students, in a resource opportunity, responding to trauma, responding like so flexible and adaptable. We're moving out of our building, we're losing administrators. The teachers there, the educators, the staff, such professionals, able to adapt, such high quality education. Who's defending that? Our own representative is saying that the status quo is unacceptable for us. For teachers, certainly that does not speak for me. So if it's about the quality of our schools, who is out there defending us, right? That yes, we have issues, but we have issues that are already in our system can be addressed. And we're instead saying we need to completely junk it and start all over, and it's really, really concerning. Then I've heard that it's actually about equality. We need equality in our schools, our equity in our funding. And instead, what you see, it's really hard to trust the legitimacy of that when you have snuck in there that this 10% supplemental cost and saying, oh, you personally might oppose it. Well, it passed the Senate it passed both the House and it passed the Senate Education Committee, so it's hard to trust the legitimacy. For me, I'm not concerned about your personal feelings about equity. If that's not a red line for you, if that's able to pass, then it's hard to trust your real concerns about education equity, because there will be real inequality if you allow for some school districts to bump up their costs. I'm going to keep going. Now, a couple more things.
20 seconds.
Well, I'm going to go a couple more things. So one is then local control is not always perfect. There's a history in the U.S. of local school districts saying, we're going to preserve segregation because our schools, we're going to keep our local schools. However, if you're asking us to trust that the state has it under control, give up your local control because the state has it under control. How can you trust a governor who appoints a secretary of education that gets completely rebuked and then sticks around, and then there's this formal vote to keep her? How are we supposed to trust the loss of our autonomy to a governor and a state that then enabled that governor to take a out of state education hater really to be appointed Secretary of Education, and we're supposed to say, no, we trust you to do, to run these schools better. And the very last thing is our schools, our education system is one of the best things in Vermont. The things that are driving costs are housing and healthcare. Where is the plan to address that? Whereas you can be spending panels, years of studies to do that. Instead, we're throwing schools really under the bus, and it's really, really concerning. What is our plan to bring people into Vermont? What is our plan for growth? Our schools are losing enrollment because there's not people moving into Vermont. There's not enough housing, not enough economic opportunities. Address that and really leave our schools alone within the system they already have.
Thank you so much. All right. Senator Vyhovsky is going to give us some next steps. Thanks so much for spending time on your Saturday morning with everyone.
Absolutely. I am going to give us some next steps, but first as a former school social worker, what I know is our schools do not have excess to cut. And as we've heard this in the room. And so at the beginning of the session, I was speaking, well, it was actually before the beginning of the session, I said this, our schools don't have anything to cut. But our communities and members of our communities are not paying their fair share into the system. And what I was met with my income-based education spending proposal is, Tanya, you're not suggesting that we make cuts to the system, you're just changing who's paying the bill. And the answer was, exactly. I'm asking the people who can afford to pay more, who are paying a fraction of a percentage of what others are paying, to pay more. Because to the point many others had made, public education is the foundation of our democracy. With the death of public education, so comes the death of democracy. And at this point in time, where we have a federal administration that is attacking democracy at every level, this is not the time that we upend our schools. And public education is supposed to be the great equalizer. But if certain people can afford to buy out of the system, it is not. And so, no, we should not be looking at any way that we weaken our public education system. And that is not to say there aren't changes that could strengthen the system. But what we need to be doing is looking at how do we better fund our education system. I would argue that, well, Vermont schools are wonderful. We could fund them more, and we should. When we are asking teachers to buy supplies for their own classrooms, and we are telling parents whose child needs a paraeducator that we just can't afford it, we are not doing the best that we could for our students. We are doing an excellent job. Vermont has an excellent education system, one of the best in the country. Why would we underfund and upend that? So, if you agree, what you can do is reach out to Senate leadership, and all of this is on the screen behind here. The Senate Pro Tem is one of the senators for this district, and he is the leader of the Senate. He sets the agenda. Reach out to him and tell him that you want strong public schools, that you want funding into our public schools, and that you want people to pay their fair share, not to underfund our schools. Our majority leader, Senator Ram Hinsdale, who did vote for the Senate education bill, reach out to her and tell her what you want. The Assistant Majority Leader, Senator Becca White, and then contacting the Senate Finance Chair, which is where this bill is right now. This is where these decisions are being made right now. These are the people to reach out to and to tell them what you want. My concern with the foundation formula is we don't have a strong track record as a state or as a nation of continuously properly funding stuff like that, and that takes the vote out of your hands. It means the state of Vermont will set how much schools get. My concern with taking mental health spending, and we are the only state in the country that puts mental health and social service spending in our ed budget, which means that when you compare our per pupil spending to any other state, we're not comparing apples to oranges. And those costs have increased huge amounts since the pandemic. But my concern with moving them to the general fund is what I know in the general fund is this governor every year level funds mental health, which is a cut to mental health services. Those systems have been underfunded for 50 or 60 years. And so if we move it from the ed fund, are we just going to underfund it more? Are we just going to further attack our students who need the most and give them the least? We can't do that. We have to say enough is enough. We have to say that the kids who need the most support have to get it. And that the proper place for us to be building those communities and building that equity is in our public schools. So contact these legislators, and if you're not in this district, contact your legislators, and will happily make sure, because it sounds like Representative Logan is going to send out some follow-up, that you have a link to find out who those people are.
Yeah.
Because we have to fight for our public educations. If not now, when?
Yeah, so thank you, Senator Vyhovsky. Thank you to all the panelists. Really appreciate everything. We've got a QR code here. This is for a Google form that you can fill out. I'll be gathering resources from the panelists and sending out links that we've been referring to if you would like them. There's also a clipboard there on the table on the way out where you can write your information down, but this is how we'll follow up with you. There are a couple fields there you can put specific questions that you didn't get a chance to ask in one field. You can also provide comments to us on what resources you'd like or any feedback that you want us to hear. I knew going into today that we were not going to provide easy answers for anybody who showed up because we're in the middle of a really complex conversation. And we started out this session with a proposal from the governor that didn't even hit a desk until 4 weeks into the session. And we're being asked to make monumental changes that are supposedly driven by cost savings, but cost savings only if we fire a bunch of teachers and close a bunch of schools. So I don't think any of us are on board with that. So trying to find a rationale for some sort of education system transformation. I will say Burlington, yes, excellent schools. Winooski, yes, excellent schools. We're talking about statewide. There are wide disparities in educational outcomes across the state, and you know, some of the we need to address the fact that Burlington and Winooski would get reduced funding. Absolutely need to do that. But there are school districts where funding would increase 25% per student because those districts keep undercutting their education system. I see that as a value for the state. So anyhow, we will follow up. This conversation is far from being over. We are not making any firm decisions except I think on independent school policy and a couple other pieces in the bills this year. Otherwise, it's setting up a process for us making decisions next year in a lot of cases. So this conversation is just getting started, and please make sure that I have your contact information and I'll send materials out.
Thank you to Kate for organizing.
Thank you, Kate.